Kulamasi, Kateri Coyhis and Dinawete, Nia Maekanu. Hello, my name is Kateri Coyhis and I am from the Mohican Nation and I am the Executive Director of White Bison. I am a person in long-term recovery, and for me that means I have not used alcohol or drugs in the last 8.5 years. Because of that, I get the honor to be a mother of 2 beautiful children, and I have a wonderful partner who, supports me in this journey. But I want to talk to you today about White Bison and the Wellbriety Movement and tell you a little bit about our organization and what we do. So White Bison, our mission, it was founded in 1988, and our mission is to provide a sustainable grassroots Wellbriety movement that provides culturally based healing for the next 7 generations of Indigenous people. Well, what is Wellbriety? Wellbriety means to live a sober lifestyle that is balanced mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. It's about being connected to the principles, values, and natural laws. It's about walking the red road, and it's about creating a healing forest, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So a long time ago, we were taught that there was a physical world that you could see, and that there was a spiritual world that you could not see, and that they were interconnected. We knew that the teachings of the earth and of nature was the source of our native culture. So a long time ago, our communities looked a little bit more like this, and we were rooted in cultural values and language and ceremony and spirituality, teachings from the elders, and we knew that there was an interconnectedness. And so we had our kids, and we would raise them up to be traditional warriors or traditional women or traditional men. And then from there, they would turn into our elders, our clan mothers. And then after that, then their bodies would return back to the earth. Then something happened to us. So what was it that took our communities from looking like this to something that looked like this? What we experienced was a big breakdown in the family structure. Families actually started to fall apart. And what we began to see is alcoholism, substance use, sexual abuse, family violence, adult children of alcoholics, unhealthy relationships. And they were rooted in anger, guilt, shame, and fear instead. And what we started to see is that our children, or our little trees, they started to go, some of them into prison, into the jail systems. Some of them started going into treatment. Some of them got involved in the court system. And unfortunately, some of them were sent to the spirit world through suicides or overdoses. So how is this done? What did it take to destroy our communities? So what I want to do is talk to you guys a little bit about some of the important US policies that led up to what happened in our Native communities. These are policies that cultivated an era and legacy of historical and intergenerational trauma. So the first one was the Indian Civilization Act of 1819. And what this did is, in the minds of early colonials, there was a fervor of evangelical Christianity. It was a movement. And what they thought is that they had a religious obligation to convert as many people as they could to Christianity. It was the first of many government policies outlining a mission to educate natives and to convert them over to Christianity. And it provided government funds that specifically gave Christian missionaries funds to establish the first mission schools to teach Native children Christianity. Then from there, the General Allotment Act, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 took place. And this was passed by President Andrew Jackson. And what it did is it basically gave the government permission to negotiate land and supposedly exchange land with natives for land in the east, for land in the west. In all actuality, what it did is they utilized this as an initiative to force native people to give up the land completely. So at this time, westward expansion was rapidly increasing, and a lot of that was due to the gold fervor in California, the gold rush, and the concept of manifest destiny, where settlers believed that they were divinely ordained to expand across the continent and spread Christianity to everyone that they encountered. From there, the General Allotment Act, the government told natives that they could trade land for citizenship. So families could receive up to 160 acres of land for individuals 18 and over. And if any surplus of land remained, then it was sold to white settlers. And again, that manifest destiny, the goal then was to spread Christianity everywhere. And so this led to a development of mission schools where natives could come and learn about Christianity. From there, what developed is that the government created day schools where they would actually go into native communities, and what they would do is they would try and teach them English and they would try and teach them Christianity, because they wanted to basically eradicate native culture. There was actually a time where they did an evaluation, the government did an evaluation on the cost of exterminating natives, in which at that particular time in the 1800s, they had a policy that allowed for settlers to go around and collect bounties on the natives. And so what they would do is they would scalp them or turn in body parts, and they were given money. And so California alone paid over $12 million in bounties alone. And they actually sat there and did an evaluation on the cost of exterminating native people versus looking at a policy of assimilation. And so these day schools, they decided that it would actually be cheaper for assimilation. And so the day schools, what the goal was is to have them stop learning about their native culture and to learn about Christianity and to learn how to speak English instead. However, that was an ineffective policy, because what they would find is that although they were learning that stuff during the day, they would go back to their families in the evening and they would still be learning all their traditions and culture and language. And they decided that that wasn't effective. So what happened is, and we'll talk a little bit more about the boarding schools, but they decided to create off-reservation boarding schools or mission schools or residential schools. And what they actually did is they had a policy where it was developed by Colonel Richard Henry Pratt. And what he said was, kill the Indian, save the man. And so the goal was to get rid of anything to do with native culture so that they could save, these kids. And so, we went on this journey of forgiveness, and the goal was really twofold. One, we wanted to give people an opportunity to know that these schools existed right here in our own country. And we wanted to give survivors an opportunity to share their story, sometimes for the first time in their whole life. And next, we wanted to promote the message of forgiveness and healing in our communities. And so Carlisle in Pennsylvania was the first of nearly 500 schools that would be set up in the United States with the goal to assimilate Native children into dominant culture. And that happened in 1879. And so what it did is it created this legacy of historical trauma. And historical trauma is a combination of immense losses and traumatic events that are perpetrated upon an entire culture. So for Indigenous communities, These losses include culture and language and land, loss of the people due to diseases and war, loss of their way of life, their spirituality, and then a big breakdown of the family structure where the children were forced into these boarding schools. Common findings from studies on intergenerational and historical trauma, and how people from traumatized cultures coped with their experiences. They found that the children had an impulse to, when they grew up, to protect other children, their family, from the horrors. People became silent and they never wanted to talk about what happened. There was a lack of trust, so it affected people in their relationships and they didn't want to look for attachments. There was also a need for distance in relationships to protect other people and their loved ones against the pain of another loss. Other findings were that people would reject their own background and identify with another group. This is a form of protection for their self, because to identify as being Native was actually dangerous. And so they viewed it that way, and they did not want to identify as Native. They would lay low, keep quiet, be invisible. They would sometimes fight back or protest. They would move away from their communities because, it created a sense of, they didn't feel like they belonged anywhere because, they looked a certain way and people could tell that they weren't white, but they didn't fit in with dominant culture. They also didn't fit in back at home with their families anymore because they didn't know any of the traditions or language. And so they would move away. They would collaborate with the oppressors, and then they would put up defenses and were often in denial about some of their experiences. And so what we find is that this is actually something that is passed down generationally, and oftentimes 2 to 3 generations will pass before the most challenging symptoms of trauma show up in individuals, in families, and in communities. And so the cultures actually go through a grief process similar to an individual, except it happens over a span of generations instead. So these stages of grief, there's shock and denial and numbness in individuals, and then 2 to 3 generations after the first major trauma, then the culture will experience that as well. And then they go through anger and rage and sadness and guilt. And so throughout the generations, what you'll find is that people that are descendants of boarding school survivors will feel a sense of guilt about surviving. And then in individuals, they search for meaning, they need the ability to integrate and move on. And in the culture, what they'll look at is restoring cultural identity and then exercising forgiveness, which is where we're kind of finding where we are in contemporary times. So there has to be a balance between remembering the past and then moving forward in life. So what complicates the healing process? These kids that attended these schools, they found that they had an inability to mourn. They didn't know a lot of times what happened to their own families or their loved ones. There was relocations, family separations. They felt a lack of political power, so they didn't feel like they had the ability to change things, and so they gave up trying. No sense of hope for the future. And then there has also been a lack of acknowledgement of the traumas that were put on to Native people by the dominant culture, and that fuels the sense of powerless and hope and helplessness and hopelessness. How does trauma get passed down through the generations? Well, people actually adapt to traumatic experiences by developing defense mechanisms and coping skills that can often be detrimental. So that could include self-medicating. For Indigenous people, enduring immense losses, grief, and post-traumatic stress actually became a normal way of living. And so they began to believe that feeling numb, being angry, acting self-destructively, feeling hopeless was just normal, is what they experienced in their everyday life, and they didn't know anything different. Other unfortunate consequences of trauma include not believing that you have a future, and then again, difficulties in relationships, a distrust of the outside world, and this gets handed down through direct parent-child interactions and also through the interactions with the extended family and the community. What we've found, scientific studies, there is actually trauma changes the epigenetic discourse of the DNA. And so it is literally handed down through the DNA throughout the generations. So this is the cycle that we have to break. The legacy of the boarding schools and intergenerational trauma, what we have found is this has affected every generation since then. And you remember how we talked about that unseen world? Well, what happens is this starts to manifest in the unseen world, and it starts to bubble up and then manifest into the physical world. And so what we're seeing it bubble up as is sexual abuse and family violence and people who have substance use issues and alcohol, and there's normal trees too. But what we've been doing is we've been looking at treating the symptoms. We have not been looking at treating the actual cause of these symptoms. Everything that we see in our communities today, we can trace back to the time of the boarding schools. And this is the cycle that we have to break. These are the trees that we see in our communities today. So what is connected to what? Alcohol is a symptom. It's not the cause. Meth, prescription drugs, heroin, domestic violence, those are actually the symptoms, not the cause. And in order to look at healing the community, what we have to do is look at dealing with the cause. So is this something that can be changed? Is it possible to go from our communities that currently look like this back to our communities that look like this, where we're grounded in healing and spirituality and ceremony and language and cultural values? So what we're saying here is that you can't keep doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying and expect different results. We have to look at doing something to promote and implement positive change. So what we have here is actually a process for implementing change, and it's called the 4 laws of change. So the first law says changes from within. The second law is in order for development to occur, it must be preceded by a vision. The third law says a great learning must occur. And then the fourth law says you must create a healing forest. So that first law says changes from within. All permanent and lasting change. All permanent and lasting change. I'm going to say it again. All permanent and lasting change starts on the inside and then works its way out. So you cannot change somebody who does not want to change. What we say is that inside every human being is the innate knowledge of their own well-being. The salmon, they're born of the knowledge, like a blueprint inside of how to be a good, healthy salmon, right? So they swim up the river, and then they know 4 years later they have to turn around, swim up the river, and lay their eggs. A bear has a blueprint, and it knows what to do to be a healthy bear. Well, human beings weren't left out. We have a blueprint inside of us that we know inside of us how to be a good, healthy human being. So we know what to do, and we have the choice to do it. And then the other teaching that goes with this law says, first you set the goal, and then you see. You do not see first. The second law says in order for development to occur, it must be preceded by a vision. So the teaching is you move towards and become like that which you think about, whether it's good for you or not, right? So if you move towards and become like that which you think about, isn't it important then to be thinking about what it is that you're thinking about? So we have to develop this vision of a healthy lifestyle, of healthy communities, of healthy families, of healthy men, of healthy young people, healthy leadership. And what we're seeing right now is that, we need to develop this vision of what we want our communities to look like. And when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So this here, it's like our communities are in a fog. So as we begin to develop this vision in our communities, what we're kind of doing is we're looking at essentially changing consciousness and lifting this fog. And we're looking at how do we utilize these traditional principles, laws, and values to implement change. The third law says a great learning must take place. And so as we begin to apply these traditional laws and principles and values, we have to actually incorporate that over the entire spectrum of life, baby, youth, adult, and elder. And so change begins with the individual, and then it moves into the family, and then it moves into the community, and then into the nation. And so everyone needs to be part of the change. The fourth law says that you must create a healing forest. So what that means is, let's just say that you have a tree and the tree is sick, and you take that tree out of the forest, and what you do is you give it all the nutrients and sunshine and vitamins and everything that it needs to become a healthy tree. Well, you take that healthy tree and you go put it back in this sick forest. What do you think is going to happen to that tree? That tree is going to get sick again. So what we actually have to do is we have to look at healing the whole forest, or the whole community, so to speak, and have it so that we can go back to these healthy communities. So this is the healing forest model. So we want our young people to grow back up as traditional women and men and elders. So now what do? We want to actually create a space for intergenerational healing. What does that mean? How do we do that? What is that defined as? So intergenerational healing is a combination of immense healing, community training, and a return back to ceremony and spirituality and the cultural ways of our people by bringing back language and culture and people's health, emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually, aka Wellbriety. People's way of life, rebuilding the family structure. Some of the pathways to healing from intergenerational trauma include healing ourselves. So again, change starts from within. That's that first law. Facilitating recovery efforts, learning the truth about our past. A lot of our young people are walking around with this anger and resentment, and they don't understand where that comes from. Well, that's because the trauma has been embedded in the DNA, and that's the experiences of their ancestors that are literally living inside of them. So we have to learn the truth about that in order to be able to heal. Addressing issues around shame, practicing forgiveness. Help to create healing spaces, and then including everyone in the healing process. And then again, we have to help create a healing forest. Other ideas about healing include telling your story, being able to generate a sense of power and hopefulness through self-efficacy, advocacy through the creation of healing spaces, legitimizing what actually happened and acknowledging that these stories are true and they really did happen here, including everyone in the healing, even the ones that are ostracized, processing of ancestors' memories and experiences, and then restoring pride in cultural heritage and identity. So the Wellbriety movement was actually introduced to Indian country in 1998. White Bison was founded in 1988, but the Wellbriety movement developed in the late 90s. Wellbriety was a word. It was actually given to us by the Passamaquoddies, but there wasn't really an English equivalent word for this. And so basically what it means is to be sober and well. So the analogy that we like to give is, let's just say you got a jerk and he's drinking and all he does is quit drinking. Well, he's sober, but he's still a jerk. And so that's why we look at whole person wellness, being healthy emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And so this Wellbriety movement is actually a live force. It's like a web, that is being transmitted. It consists of large numbers of our people, their interconnectedness, and they all have a focus of working on wellness. So we say it's one message, but carried by many messengers. And that's, we are in a time of healing right now. So these different messengers can look like peer recovery support, law enforcement, behavioral health, mental health, treatment, schools, spiritual support or church, the news and media, the community. These are all of our different messengers, right? But we all have to be coming together with the same message, which is the healing of our people. And so it takes an entire village. It takes everybody coming to the circle to work on this. So here we are in 2020, and a long time ago, what we saw is that there was just issues mostly around alcohol. But what we're seeing now is that it includes so many other facets. There's mental health issues, there's other drugs, there's issues around nutrition, meth, who knows what else. And so the issues that we're seeing now are multifaceted, and we have to be able to be prepared to address them all and not to just look at addressing one symptom at a time. This is no longer just an alcohol problem. There are many different paths to recovery. There's different 12-step fellowships like AA, there's medication-assisted treatment, there's other 12-step groups, there's Al-Anon, there's some people find their path to recovery through church, through Wellbriety, through NA, smart recovery, whatever the case may be. There's many different paths to recovery now. So what we're actually looking at doing is, because of the fact that there are people who are experiencing so many different issues, we're looking at changing the language and the stigma and the approach to being in recovery. So while we really value all the different fellowships and pathways, we also want to give people an opportunity to be more inclusive about their recovery. So some of the things that we do through Wellbriety is, in order to be more inclusive, is we just say, my name is so-and-so and I am in recovery, and it has that kind of more positive connotation with it. So my name is so-and-so and I'm in recovery, and being able to discuss, multiple issues at the same time. And so what we say is the opposite of addiction is connection, and so we have to connect everybody together. It's really important then to bring together these different community resources that we have. Wellbriety programs, law enforcement, support meetings, collegiate recovery, inpatient treatment, etc. We have to look at being able to change together as a community. So how we do that is we get everybody working towards the same vision and goal. So it's part of that 4 laws of change, right? We have to develop that vision. Motivate people to participate, develop skills and knowledge through training and through education, to reclaim and implement cultural values and tradition, to create a supportive environment to sustain these changes. How do we make sure that that lasts? So through White Bison, what we have developed is a series of programs that help with addressing men in recovery, women in recovery, and those are called our Medicine Wheel and 12 Steps for Men and Women. We have programs that look at helping youth heal, their prevention programs called Sons and Daughters of Tradition. We have programs that address youth in treatment and recovery, which is our Medicine Wheel and 12 Steps for Youth. We have our programs for healthy families, healthy motherhood, healthy fatherhood. We have programs that address whole family wellness. It's called Wellbriety and Celebrating Families. This is actually an evidence-based program, and we partnered with the National Association for Children of Addiction to take their evidence-based program and incorporate a cultural overlay into the program. We are in the process of developing a collegiate recovery toolkit to help people get Wellbriety groups and meetings going on college campuses. And then we have a program that addresses healing from this unresolved grief and trauma. It's called Mending Broken Hearts. We have a program for reentry for people coming back into the community from incarceration or treatment. And this is our Warrior Down Recovery Coach program. So it's a reentry program, but we also train peer recovery coaches. And so what we've been able to do through these multiple programs that we have developed is we have been able to create a process for a 5-year plan, a 5-year community improvement plan. But it's going to take a commitment on your part, right? So what you have to do first is answer this question. Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? And if you are, then what we can do is we can actually bring to your community a whole 5-year plan. What that consists of is developing, it starts with what we call a community readiness survey. So again, you can't change people who aren't willing to change, right? So what we do is we have a tool that we can actually take about 6 to 8 informed members of the community. Doesn't mean that they have to be educated or have all these different degrees, just well-informed people who know what is actually going on in the community, and we interview them. And based on their responses, we're able to evaluate and measure the readiness of the community for change. And so what we do is we go and we offer the community feedback from the community readiness survey. And we go in and we work with the community. We work with the leadership, we work with the program heads, and we work with the community itself. And we bring everybody together and we do these mind mapping sessions where we are able to develop a vision for a healthy community, right? Part of that 4 laws of change. And so we go in and we do this community visioning process and we develop a vision book. And from there, what we are able to do is a tailored, specific plan depending on what the goals and visions are of the community and what the community readiness model says. We can go in and actually mobilize the whole community by developing a coalition, doing training, implementing our Mending Broken Hearts process, implementing their vision for them. And so we have the ability, depending on the needs, to take any part of the programs that we have to offer, depending on whatever the issues are in that community. We can go in and implement them. So it's a 7-step plan. You know, we go in, we train people how to facilitate and implement these programs in their community. We collect data, and then we go in, we develop these recovery circles. We are going to be training people on how to do recovery activism, you know, advocate for your community, get funding, all of these different things that we're going to train people how to do. And then we'll evaluate the progress. And then we'll look at putting together a coalition that is comprised of community members, tribal council, and then having people get trained on Wellbriety leadership. And then the last step is we would go and evaluate, review how things are going, and then, you know, make changes and then celebrate the successes of the communities, because that part is important. So we have this 7-step process for community change. And what we say is when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change. And so we have this healing approach. And I want to kind of tell you guys a little bit of a story to talk about the importance of working together, and it's called the 3 Sisters. It's an elder's approach to community healing. And so there were these 3 sisters, and they were walking by the river, and what they heard is a noise, and they saw that there were these babies floating in the water. And so the first sister freaks out, and what she does is she jumps into the water, and what she does is she starts grabbing these babies and she tosses them on the shore, and she starts rescuing these babies. Well, the second sister was doing an evaluation. She was looking at what was going on. And so she jumped into the water, and, you know, they were missing some of the babies. They couldn't grab them all and throw them on the shore. So what she started to do was teach these babies how to swim, right? So she could grab the ones that weren't getting thrown to the shore. So then they started yelling for the third sister to come and help them. And so she just sat there for a minute and she was looking at what was going on, and they yelled at her, "Get in here and help." What happened is she took off running. And so what she actually was doing is she wanted to go up the shore and find out, why were these babies coming down the river in the first place? What was happening? And so we talk about our culture being prevention, and that's sort of like the different stages. So we have, treatment, and then we have recovery, and then we have prevention, and those are the different three sisters and the importance of all of them working together. So rescue, um, treatment and training, and then our culture. So when we have the culture, we don't have, what we find is that we don't really have any babies coming down the river. So that cultural piece is really important, and that's why we are able to put these culturally based approaches and build them into the programs that we have. So what we believe is that the solutions actually reside within each community. They're in you. There is an interconnectedness going on, and it's again going to take everyone to heal the community, and then it's going to take place through an application of cultural and spiritual knowledge. But we also believe that the healing of our communities is entirely possible. So because of the idea that recovery, people have more than one issue that they're dealing with, what we did is we developed a type of conference. It's called the Wellbriety All Addictions Recovery Conference. We had our first one in January in Santa Fe of 2020, January 2020. And what we did is we brought together multiple fellowships: AA, Al-Anon, NA, Wellbriety, gambling, CODA, all these different ones. And we invited representatives from each fellowship to speak and share their experience, strength, and hope. And then we also had panels of speakers. And so we're going to do this again. This time it will be September of 2021. It'll take place in Colorado Springs, and we want to invite all of you to participate. It's just about people coming together, fellowshipping, talking about recovery, and talking about healing. One of the other resources that we do have available to help is that we have daily online meetings now on Zoom. You can join here's a listing of the times in the different time zones. We do a lot of advertising on our social media for these different meetings. We are also part of a wonderful resource called intherooms.com. They have every fellowship on there that you can possibly imagine, including Wellbriety meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then, we have a lot of really wonderful projects that are coming up that we would like to share with you that could help. So one of the things that we're doing, it's called Warrior Down for Youth. And what it is it's going to be a program for young people who have friends or family members that are in recovery. It's a support group for them. And so we're going to have like a jar of different meeting topics, and they're all going to be topics that the kids pick out that they actually want to have a meeting and talk about. And so each week when they get together, they'll pick a topic, a meeting topic out of the jar, and then they'll talk about that. It's actually going to be the final component in a program, an initiative that we have developed. It's called No More Fallen Feathers, and it's a youth suicide prevention initiative. So what we do is we feel like it's going to take more than just one program or one training to help with suicide prevention in our communities, which is a really big deal. So we take our prevention, we take our Mending Broken Hearts for Youth program, which focuses on the healing from grief and trauma, so they have an understanding about why our communities are the way they are, and then how to navigate those feelings of grief and what happens with trauma and stuff and how they're impacted. We have our program called Understanding the Purpose of Life. What that does is it helps kids find their purpose, and then it also takes a focus on education. And then depending on the group of young people that you're working with, we have our prevention programs, or we have our youth treatment and recovery programs that you can implement. And then again, the Warrior Down for Youth would be that final component. We're also in the process of developing a life skills program, because we have a lot of dysfunction in our communities, and some of them don't learn how to do some basic skills like cooking, how to change a tire, how to balance a checkbook, how to do all these different things that they're going to need. And so we have developed a program that can help teach them those important life skills so that they can be a healthy, functioning adult. We're going to be developing something for Native veterans in prison. We're going to actually be looking at launching at the beginning of the year an International Technical Assistance Center. And so what we're able to do through that Technical Assistance Center is we're able to provide consulting, we're able to provide training, we're able to do webinars, some of which will be able to earn continuing education. We are able to actually help people with grant writing. We'll be able to have, we have actually a way that we can develop specific culturally based evaluation tools. So what we find is that a lot of times some of the culturally based approaches are not being recognized as evidence-based practices. Well, that's because they're being measured by a westernized evaluation tool. So what we can do, they just don't fit. So what we can do is actually develop these culturally based evaluation tools to measure and evaluate these culturally based approaches. So it's a really wonderful service that we're going to be able to offer. And then again, we're going to be developing these collegiate recovery starter kits for people that want to start Wellbriety meetings on college campuses, within their diversity groups or whatever the case may be. I'd just like to share with you really quick that we do have some literature and things that you all can have access to. These are some of our most popular books. I'd like to really highlight the Red Road to Wellbriety book, which you can get through our online Wellbriety store. But it helps you to go through the 12-step process with culturally based teachings that are embedded in it. And then we do have daily meditations for anybody who would be interested in it. You can go to coyhispublishing.com to get any of our literature. We have jewelry, we have chips and medallions, we have videos and all kinds of other materials that you can have access to. Here's our contact information. If you want to reach out to our office, you can schedule training in your community. We can come right to you. But also, due to the times, we are able to offer the majority of our trainings on a virtual platform as well. So reach out to us. We can do any of these trainings for you. We're very active on social media, so we have Facebook groups and pages, including the White Bison page. We have a group called Sobriety is Traditional. We have the daily meditations. You can access those there. Our training institute. We actually have a group called Wellbriety Response to COVID-19, and what we do is we have people come on and they share about what they're doing in their community. They share about traditional knowledge on how to deal with the pandemic. It's a very cool thing. We do a lot of giveaways and promotions there. This month is Heritage Month, and so we're doing some giveaways around that. So other than that, that's pretty much what I'd like to share with you guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Wellbriety movement, about the programs that we offer, about how you can get involved. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.
My name is Carolina Castoreno Santana. I'm the Executive Director of the American Indian Center of Indiana. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Lipan Apache tribe of Texas, and I'm also of Mescalero Apache and Yaqui descent. So basically what we do at the American Indian Center is we service all Native people living in the state of Indiana. We have a variety of programs. Probably our most prominent one is through the workforce development sector. And so we are funded through the Department of Labor to focus on eliminating barriers to employment for Indigenous people living in Indiana. And so this often means we do a lot of work with getting people certified, getting people help with training, job search, scholarships, tool assistance, as well as uniform assistance. And then there are other transportation and emergency services that we offer. And through this program is kind of how we are able to work on our other programs and how it opens up the door to more opportunities, such as the Wellbriety project we're working on. So we do other programs that focus on civic engagement, as well as health awareness and discussing health disparities in the Native community. And so with that, we came across a lot of issues where we had clients who were struggling with mental health, addiction, and alcoholism. And so we would try to use our resources to help them get the assistance they needed. Oftentimes, we had the same people coming back to us because they were not successful in these programs or they experienced discrimination. And a lot of the issues are surrounding this kind of lack of awareness of Indigenous cultures, Indigenous worldviews, that kind of really set us aside from traditional Western standards. And so with every program or facility that we looked into getting help for people, even those that claim not to be faith-based still have a kind of top-down, westernized Judeo-Christian kind of format for recovery. And so even though there's this emphasis on it not necessarily being a specific religion or denomination, there's a very high emphasis on this higher power structure, which is not necessarily how Indigenous perspectives work. And it also doesn't get at a lot of the root causes of trauma, because Indigenous people have a very unique history with the United States and this society. We also have a unique set of factors that play into what leads to addiction, and where the trauma comes from. And so we actually had, as part of the workforce development, had a participant who wanted to get certified as a peer recovery coach. So we helped her with that. She later came back to us and wanted to get certified in Wellbriety through the program that White Bison was promoting. And so we sent her to that training. So she's officially the only person in the state of Indiana that has that training, and is able to, and has that type of certification as a Wellbriety facilitator. So we wanted to look more into what Wellbriety provides, and it is Native-based recovery practices. It is also evidence-based, so that's something that is really important for funders or people in the community, people in the mental health industry, to understand that it's not just from a Native perspective, but it is evidence-based. And so we looked at the different types of programmings they have, the different types of trainings, and thought how important this would be to bring to Indiana so that Indigenous people and people outside of the Indigenous community who are looking for that more holistic approach to healing and recovery, how they would be able to benefit from this. And so we, last year for Native Heritage Month, I did a presentation for the Division of Mental Health and Addiction for FSSA. And with really just the intention of kind of, addressing this issue, because it's not something that is discussed enough in general, but even less so in Indiana, where there's kind of like this stigma that there aren't natives here, even though we are. We do have a significantly lower population, smaller population compared to states out west, but we are here, and we do feel like, these are, we've got to advocate for ourselves to remind people of that. So really that was just my intention of kind of doing a presentation for Native Heritage Month, and addressing specifically mental health and addiction. And luckily through that and continued conversations with DMHA, we were able to secure a contract to bring Wellbriety training seminars here to Indiana so we can get more people certified in this type of work, and then also kind of spread this cultural awareness training, and bring people on board to help them understand what what are the unique sets of experiences and what to look for when you are working with Native populations and working on treating them for these issues. So we yeah, so and then COVID happened this year, so we initially had planned to get a lot of this training done prior to September, and then everything shut down. A lot of us had to move to virtual type of trainings and discussions and meetings, but that also, that created an incident for White Bison also to reschedule several trainings. So we've been steadily working with them to bring these trainings here. And so we have scheduled so far 3, 2 virtual, 1 in person, and we are working on several more of these types of trainings in the different areas. So we have Warrior Down is going to be in December. And then in January, we have the 12 steps for men and women. And then we have Mending Broken Hearts, which is really getting to that piece of that intergenerational trauma, childhood trauma, the different types of trauma that really impact our lives. So it's not even necessarily specifically addiction related. This has to do with kind of the trauma that Indigenous people experience in many facets of life, and that will be in March. So that is how we have gotten to this point so far.
Carolina, could you share the upcoming dates of the Wellbriety training with our attendees?
Yes, so we will be having the Warrior Down training this December, and that is going to be from December 8th through 11th. It is a virtual training that you will be able to sign up for if you are interested. And then in January, we have the Medicine Wheel and 12 Steps for Men and Women, which will also be a virtual training from January 12th through the 15th. And then the Mending Broken Hearts is an in-person one, which is why we put it out a little bit to see if we can try to get some better results with cases, and it'll be a little bit safer to meet in person, but we will have social distancing guidelines in place. And that will be from March 31st to April 2nd, and we will have a flyer coming for that shortly. But you will be able to contact us with at the email that will be provided if you are interested in that training as well, and to get information on any future trainings that will be held this coming year.